So now we're going to look at hormones of the pancreas, specifically the endocrine hormones of the pancreas. So when we think about the endocrine hormones of the pancreas, the two hormones that mainly come in mind is insulin and glucagon. So what are their main functions? Their main function is to regulate blood sugar levels, right? So there's a change in these blood sugar levels that takes place throughout the body. So insulin and glucagon work together antagonistically in order to regulate a homeostatic balance of osmolarity. Right. So let's first figure out where they're from. So in the pancreas, in the endocrine region, there's a region called the islet of Langerhans. So in the islet of Langerhans, you have these specific type of cells called beta, alpha, and gamma cells. We're not going to focus too much on gamma. That's referring to somatostatin. But for the sake of insulin and glucagon, we can tell you right now that insulin is secreted by these beta cells, whereas glucagon is secreted by these alpha cells, right? And what is each of their responsibilities? Okay, so when we think about regulation of blood sugar, we're referring to regions of maintenance of osmolarity. Osmolarity is regulated based off of the ratios of solute to solvent in the blood. Right? So if I were to ask you what is a solute, solute is what is being dissolved in the solvent, right? So an example of solute in your body: sugar, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals. These are all examples of solutes. Solvents would be example is water. An increase and decrease loss of these ratios can lead to an increase or decrease in osmolarity. So if I increase the solute to solvent concentration, I have an increase in osmolarity. Instances of pathological conditions like diabetes mellitus, this leads to an increase in osmolarity. This increase in osmolarity leads to a lot of pathological abnormalities, increased blood sugar levels, degeneration of blood vessels, which eventually leads to ischemia, which is the lack of blood flow. Then, if there's a lack of blood flow to the specific tissue, you have an instance where the tissue dies. That's called necrosis. And then eventually, if the tissue dies and you have this instance of necrosis, eventually you lead to other pathological problems of the body. All right. So solute to solvent ratio is really important. That is regulated by insulin and glucagon. Right. So function of insulin is to do what? Function of insulin is to decrease blood sugar levels, whereas a function of glucagon is to increase blood sugar levels, right? And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail of how the mechanism of everything works, but just understand what is actually happening based off of this, right? And then finally, when we talk about during the different states of metabolism, glucagon has a high prevalence of being secreted during the fasted state. So when we talk about fasted state, what does that mean? So this is fasted, meaning there's an instance where there's a long period of time where you have not consumed any kind of nutrients, right? So 8 to 12 hours, you haven't eaten any sugar, fats, or anything like that. And this is secreted during a fasted state. Insulin, however, is secreted during a fed state, right? So when you eat a big meal, some kind of pizza, taco, something like that, right? California burritos, everyone's obsessed with those things, right? Fed state, this is where you've eaten everything. And so the reason why this is important is you can see that insulin's use is to begin the storage process of a lot of the sugars, right? To bring the blood sugar back down. Glucagon is the opposite, correct? And so when you have hypersecretions of each, this can lead to a lot of pathological problems, right? So if I have excessive secretion of glucagon, so this raises to an increase in blood sugar levels. Increase, or let's not even look at the increase. Let's look at abnormality. There is some hypersecretion of glucagon that is being released. So this leads to an increase in blood sugar levels. That is called hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia can be created if there is an increase in glucagon, right? So your body is in a fasted state or some kind of normal state and you have hypersecretion of glucagon, that can lead to instances of hyperglycemia. Vice versa here, if you have a hypersecretion of insulin, that can lead to hypoglycemia. So make sure you understand where the actual mechanisms is happening, right? So if I have an increased insulin levels, right? So insulin is result of, the main function is to decrease the blood sugar levels, right? So if you have too much insulin, you have to go into a state of low blood sugar, so hypoglycemia, all right? And so these are the two specific hormones involved in regulating the homeostatic balance of blood sugar.